There are houses that eat people. Her father's palace was that kind of house. Beautiful, naturally, always beautiful. 32 rooms of pale stone and polished marble floors and painted ceilings showing skies that existed nowhere on the actual horizon. Too perfect, cloudless, without the lateral dirt that real skies carry. In the mirror corridors, her reflection multiplied endlessly, always fractionally different from the original, as though the surfaces of that place showed not what she was, but what they expected her to become. Rapunzel had learned early not to meet her own eyes in those mirrors. The mirrors in the palace always added something. Her father loved her. She was reasonably certain of this, which was, on reflection, a strange formulation to apply to a father's love. Reasonably certain, as though affection were a matter of estimation and probability rather than knowledge, as though the question were one you evaluated with that word there, reasonably, rather than one that simply settled in you like weather, like gravity, like the things that need no proof because their absence is unthinkable. He loved her the way one loves a well-performing investment, with the attentive interest of someone who has placed a bet and watches the returns accumulate. It was not cruelty. It was something nearly worse. It was logic. It was how that palace thought, and her father had lived so long inside those walls that he had stopped distinguishing the palace from himself. When he looked at Rapunzel, he looked with the eyes of someone planning, a few moves ahead, a few years ahead, a few treaties ahead. The ambassadors were the more honest of the two, paradoxically. When they had drunk enough, the mask loosened, and beneath was simply the work, the quick, technical, professional appraisal of someone cataloging an asset before setting a price. They were not wicked. They were efficient. Rapunzel understood at 13 that there is a difference between the two, but that the difference changes nothing for the person being cataloged. At 14, the courtiers had begun to smile at her differently. The new smiles had a particular quality she needed a full year to identify. Warm on the surface, calculated beneath, with a specific incongruity of timing. Half a second between the gesture and the feeling, as though the emotion were being manufactured rather than experienced. Half a second. Once she started counting them, the palace became unlivable. The nights were worst. Not for the dreams. Dreams were almost a respite. For the sounds. The palace at night produced a constant, low-grade noise that was never quite loud enough to identify, but always present enough to prevent real silence. Muffled voices, distant music, the footsteps of guards, the breathing of a building that never slept, as though it had a metabolism, as though it were hungry. Rapunzel began spending her nights in the garden. The old woman was on the other side of the boundary wall on the Wednesday evening in November when Rapunzel decided, without entirely knowing it yet, that the document had already been written. She did not know for certain, but she had watched her father and the ambassador of the Northern Kingdom lock themselves in the study for 3 hours, and had felt at dinner afterward a different quality in the smiles directed at her, softer, more settled. The smile of people who have already signed something and are waiting only for the right moment to announce it. The old woman was not exactly waiting, or perhaps she had been waiting so long that waiting had become her natural state, indistinguishable from simple existence, the way breathing is. Her eyes were the color of amber, and her face was like the bark of an ancient tree, carved, deep, written over in a language no one teaches, but that once seen is impossible to forget.
"Your father owes me something," she said. No dramatic inflection, only a fact set down on a table. I know. It isn't yours to pay. And yet I will pay it, or someone who never asked will pay it instead. A pause. It is always this way. The old woman studied her for a long moment. Then, I could take you away. Not as punishment, as an arrangement. What do you ask? Only what your father has already lost the right to keep. She smiled. Small, even teeth. The mouth of someone who has never had to bite back her own words. Rapunzel thought about the mirrors that added something. About the half-second smiles. About the document with her name on it waiting somewhere for its moment. She reached her hand into the dark.
The tower did not rise. It grew. The way things grow that have always had the right shape and were waiting only for the right moment to show it. Stone almost white, tall enough that looking up from below the next morning, she could not find where it ended. No doors. One window only, at the top, overlooking a forest so vast and still, it seemed less a landscape than a statement. This is what exists when you stop building palaces. The silence was the first thing. Not silence as the absence of sound. That kind exists in empty corridors at night. Silence as the absence of intention. No one wanted anything. The walls wanted nothing. The stone wanted nothing. The wind through the single window wanted nothing. For the first time in 14 years of awareness, Rapunzel found herself in a space that was not measuring her. She wept for 4 days. She could not entirely explain why, and decided it did not matter. The old woman came each evening, called from below without urgency, and Rapunzel lowered her hair, which meanwhile grew, slowly at first, then with a quiet continuity, as though recovering years in which it had not had room. Not as ornament, not as ladder. The way a plant in enough space extends itself in the direction that makes sense without asking permission of anyone. She learned the forest through the window. She learned the seasons as events in themselves, not as backdrop to human drama, but as facts complete and self-sufficient. She learned that silence has different textures at different hours, and that the August dark smelled of herbs she had no names for, but recognized anyway, in some layer of herself older than language. She learned that walls, when they belong to no one who wants something from you, are only walls. Was she happy? She was whole. The distinction matters. She heard him arrive before she saw him. The sound of hooves had that quality of someone who does not concern himself with making noise, having no reason to believe noise could constitute a problem. He arrived at the edge of the clearing with the expression of someone who has found what he was looking for, and that was the first thing that troubled her. He had not been looking for her specifically. He had been looking for something of that type, a beautiful thing in a difficult place to free and carry away. He was the kind of person who builds his identity on rescues, who needed the rescues, not the person rescued. "Beautiful girl," he called out. "Come away with me." Not, "Do you want to come?" Not, "May I help?" Simply, "Come away." The verb without a subject, because the subject was already implied, him, and the object, her, did not need to be consulted. "I am not a prisoner," said Rapunzel. He laughed, almost genuinely, almost warmly, and this was the second thing that troubled her. Cold predators are recognizable. The ones convinced of their own goodness are nearly invisible. Every princess in a tower is a prisoner. That is the definition. Rapunzel looked at his eyes with the attention she had learned in the Palace of Mirrors. She looked for the mechanism beneath the gesture. She recognized them. Not him, the eyes. They were the same as the ambassador's eyes when wine loosened their control. They were the same as her father's eyes when he was calculating. The same structure beneath, the same warmth spread over it like lacquer. Sincere, self-certain, entirely incapable of perceiving its own nature. He came back for 7 days. He brought stories of a world she had already lived in and left. Every account had been purged of whatever made it true. The violence of treaties reduced to heroism. The feasts of the palace reduced to gaiety. The women of that world reduced to presences in the margins. Decorative, necessary, like curtains at windows. On the 7th day, he said, "Let me climb. I want to look at you closely." Rapunzel was still for a long moment. Then she lowered her hair. Not to invite him, to measure. She felt him ascending through her braids, the weight of him, the steady rhythm, the methodical determination of someone who does not consider the obstacle as a possibility. He arrived at the window with flushed cheeks and eyes bright with what he believed was victory. He brought a gift. Of course he brought a gift. A small silver mirror with his initials engraved on the back. As though the most natural gesture, arriving at a stranger's window after an uninvited climb, was to hand her an instrument for seeing herself through him. "How do I see you?" he repeated when she asked. "As the most beautiful thing I have ever found." Found. The right word, without knowing it. The way one finds an herb in someone else's garden. The way one takes something that was not waiting for you, but that you can take anyway, with clean hands, entirely convinced you have done nothing wrong. Rapunzel looked at the mirror. She saw herself in it. Same face, same gray eyes, same hair reaching to the floor. The same person she had been before he arrived. Intact. Unchanged. She set the mirror on the sill, turned it to face the forest. "You have to go," she said. He laughed again, that elastic laugh, that layer of benevolent patience for those who have not yet understood. "I climbed a tower for you." "And I," said Rapunzel, "spent years building something without doors." He did not descend on his own. The hair was long. It had grown for years without decorative intention, without being designed as ladder or signal or symbol of anything at all. It had grown because that is what a healthy organism does in enough space. It extends in the direction that makes sense. Rapunzel took the scissors she used for herbs. She made the most practical gesture of her life. He fell, a brief cry, surprised, the sound of someone who had not anticipated this variable in his plan. The forest received him without ceremony. The thorns found him halfway down. He did not die. He remained in the wood, blind, searching for something he would not find again. Rapunzel sat on the floor of the tower with the cut braids in her lap. Outside, the forest was quiet, the way it always is. Not because nothing is happening, but because what is happening has no need to announce itself. The old woman climbed that evening. She looked at the braids. She looked at Rapunzel. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Did you make the right choice?" Rapunzel thought about it. She thought about the prince's eyes, about her father's eyes, about all those gazes that had the shape of warmth and the structure of calculation. "I don't know," she said at last. "But it was my choice." The old woman nodded. She descended, without adding anything. The old stories insist on painting their prisons in particular shades: stone walls slicked with moisture, iron chains eaten through with rust, wardens without mercy, without names. They teach you to pity the girl in the tower, to weep for the golden braids she lowers into the void, like a prayer for rescue, like a hand reaching for something that keeps not arriving. But the stories are wrong about where the darkness lives. The most exquisite cruelty requires no walls at all. The real darkness moved out there, in the world of men, a kingdom of mud and hungry courts, where a girl who was too gentle, too quiet, too much herself, was nothing but flesh to be bartered for a treaty, for a strip of land, for a season's peace between men who would break the peace by spring. Rapunzel knew the taste of that fear. She had felt the weight of predatory eyes in the mirror-lined corridors of her father's palace, had breathed the smell of wine and violence that soaked into every royal feast like damp into old stone. And so, when the old woman of the forest reached her hand into the dark, the bargain did not feel like a curse at all. A soul is a coin spent gladly if the price is forgetting. The tower rose, an ivory tooth driven into the sky, doorless, deaf to the whispers of the earth below. A pristine refuge where time had stopped, where her hair grew long and heavy, not to invite the world to climb, but to draw a veil of gold between her eyes and the horror beneath. And slowly, quietly, the hair began to grow again.